Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of the Carvel Community Meeting. Today's date is August 19th, 2021. If you're tuning in from home, watching this as a recording, we encourage you to join us live. We meet every Thursday at 10:30 a.m. Pacific time. It's an opportunity for you to come meet the team. You can lurk in and just listen in on what we're working on, or if there's something that you need help with regarding any of the tools, the maintainers are eager to listen in and provide feedback and help you through that. Or if you have any feedback on how you want the tools to be improved, we also would love to hear from you regarding that as well. If you aren't able to attend any of the meetings live, you can share with us through a couple of other options. We have Slack and Twitter, the Kubernetes Slack workspace, and the Carvel channel. If you're not part of the Kubernetes Slack workspace, you'll just need to request an invitation to join. It's really easy. You'll just send the request and they're pretty quick to approve that request. We ask that when you attend these meetings to please read and abide by our code of conduct and add your name and the organization that you represent here in the attendees section. That helps us understand who outside of VMware is attending these meetings and to keep those lines of communications open. Just a couple of announcements we have here. We released YTT 0.36. And does anyone want to go over this release?
I know if Garrett was here, he'd have some details. He was a big part of that. I think in general, the theme here was improving error messages that are coming out of our newly GA'd schema features and a few kind of internal cleanups. Yeah, so these are some follow-ons from that schema work.
Great. Thanks, John. Next up, just a reminder to register for the Spring 1 workshop that we have coming up on Thursday, September 2nd. If you are wanting to learn more about Carvel, or you're still maybe you're just using a couple of the tools and want to learn more about some of the other ones, this is a good opportunity for you to get more hands-on with learning how to use all the tools in Carvel. Okay, on to status updates. Over the project roadmap itself. We have private registry authentication for kapp-controller. How is it looking with that release for that item?
Things are moving along pretty well here. I think for the most part, it's been, Daniel, Joe, Eli, and Dimitri that are focused on some of the stuff. But we got over kind of what I would consider like one of the big initial hurdles, which is just kind of like a steel thread of the package install experience. So just wrap that part up and just continuing to keep focus on this. I don't know, Joe, Dimitri, anything else that you want to add to this? Cool.
Cool. Thanks, Aaron. And then the other two things are coming up for September.
Yeah, so the second one, I think we actually have a discussion item to go over the proposal for the exporting YTT schema as an OpenAPI schema. So we'll probably chat about that a little bit more. The third row around just API package management API enhancements. This was for like a fairly generic placeholder, and we should probably update this. But nothing specific to call out there. It's just like general UX improvements. And this page was last updated last month, so we should probably update this soon as we've started to have some more planning discussions recently.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Erin. And will you be updating that? Should I put down an action item?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Next up, the backlog. Is there anything within this that the team's working on this week that you want to call out that's outside of the roadmap?
I would maybe just encourage individuals if there's anything that they want to share about what they've been working on this week.
I can give a small update. Me and Garrett have been working on the story to capture image metas information in an image package lock file in kbuild. This was a story I picked up a few weeks ago, went on vacation. So it is getting attention once again. And then, yeah, otherwise for me, just working through the OpenAPI proposal.
One thing that I worked on recently and actually failed to let Nancy know, there's a new vendor release that included a few collected items. One of those items actually was a support for automatic tag selection when fetching things like an image or image package bundle from a registry. There was also a few other enhancements done by the community members that are called out in the release notes in vendor. So that's something to take a look at if using that tool.
Thanks, Dimitri. Yeah, I actually saw I was tagged in the GitHub one, and I'll make sure to tweet that out if that release happened. Okay, anything else that folks want to share? Okay. Onward to discussion topics. And again, if you have anything that you wish to discuss with the team or share with the community, please be sure to add that in this section here, and we'll get to it. First item is something that I added in here. Wanted to bring this to the community. We are calling on y'all to share with us if you're using Carvel. We would love to hear from you. First off, thank you for using Carvel. We want to hear from you. How are you using it? How can we improve it? If you would like to be featured on our adopters file, that is an opportunity for us to help promote your organization and continue to work with you. All you need to do is go to this pinned issue and share a comment with the following information: your organization or company, the link to your website, the country, your contact information, what is your scenario for using Carvel, are you running the application in testing or production, and then attaching a PNG version of your logo. We already have a community member that has filled this out already. Thanks to Scott from TerraSky. Really appreciate you adding that information in there. So it's a good example here of how to fill that out. Okay, on to the next discussion topic, the OpenAPI proposal. I'll stop sharing my screen so that whoever put this in there, we can use that.
Yeah, I can share my screen. Cool. So for this discussion topic, I was sort of hoping to give a brief overview of the proposal and just a few parts of the proposal specifically, parts that haven't been yet decided. I would love to get others' feedback on what is currently being proposed, and if others see any issues or have alternatives that they would like to mention, now would be a great time for that. And also, like, feel free to interrupt me and ask questions about the proposal as I kind of go over it, or bring something up if you're like, oh, I don't know what that word means, or something like that. That feel free to interrupt. So this piece of work is to generate an OpenAPI schema from a YTT data values schema. It's specifically in the OpenAPI format. This format can be used for validating inputs using like other tools that do OpenAPI validation. It also serves as documentation to what inputs your YTT configuration allows. So you can supply information like a description for a key value, the type that's required, some validations like a maximum number or minimum number, that sort of thing. YTT right now has its own data values schema format. And this proposal is to use that YTT data values schema format to generate an OpenAPI schema format. So the current proposal introduces 2 flags. So the current YTT flags look like this. There's a files inspect, data values inspect, data values inspect takes in -o JSON to change the output format. Following that similar flag format, we are proposing a data values schema inspect flag, which will print the YTT data values schema in the OpenAPI format. That's specifically this flag when you use it with -o OpenAPI. There's also a flag for just viewing the schema in YTT format. And then there's also a flag for viewing the schema in OpenAPI full format. So this would be not just the schema portion of the OpenAPI document, but also including the headers and metadata that comes with that, such as version. Scroll down to what that looks like. That's these additional fields, OpenAPI version and info, where you can give a little bit of a description about the document. Otherwise, just the schema section would be everything under components.schemas, which might look something like this. Any questions so far on that?
Just a clarifying question. In the current flag set, is there a missing space? That last one, YTT data values inspect -o, is it OJSON all as one thing?
Yeah, I believe that you can do -o space JSON, or you can do it all together as one word.
Okay.
Yeah, because the show takes takes an argument. Cobra is smart enough to understand that whatever comes next is for the show. Now for Booleans, not gonna work.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to make sure we weren't introducing inconsistency. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
One other thing I would just add on that flag in particular, there's other types, YAML, JSON, or POS, POS. And YAML is the default value. So that's kind of like what the second one is.
Yeah, good call out. Okay, cool. So now that you have sort of an overview, I'd like to talk about how this would be used specifically in kapp-controller. So kapp-controller is one of the users of this OpenAPI spec or OpenAPI schema. And kapp-controller has a field in the package CR. So this is kapp-controller's docs. There's a section in this package for values schema, OpenAPI v3. This is where you would put a YTT OpenAPI schema that documents, what values your YTT configuration allows, because this package uses and templates YTT configuration. This is a way to document like what is allowed. So kapp-controller being, one of the users of this has sort of a specific use case. So in the proposal, there's a recommended workflow of how you would insert the OpenAPI schema into a kapp-controller package CR. And that workflow is fairly straightforward. You'd create the schema from a data value schema file, might look like this. You'd save it to a file, maybe name that file openapi.yaml. And then the way that you can insert it into the package CR is using YTT. So you can just add the OpenAPI file that you just created as a data values file using the data value file command. You have to name the data value using this method. So call it OpenAPI schema. And that's what this syntax is. And then in your package CR, all you need to do is import, a few libraries here, data and YAML. And then you can use your data value OpenAPI schema right here, and it will insert this file into your package CR inline right here. Another thing I want to call out is because the data is read in as a string using this command, you do have to do this YAML encode to make sure that it's in YAML format rather than in multi-line string format. And so the reason I bring this up is because, this is what we believe is the simplest workflow for using this OpenAPI schema with kapp-controller. And I'm curious to get feedback from maybe those who work on kapp-controller on whether there's anything about this that, doesn't make sense or would be, rough edge or, anything like that, anything you notice. I'd love to hear from those.
So I think this is a fairly I think good attempt in how we can insert this this chunk of YAML into another chunk. One unknown I have in my mind is, and this is something that we haven't really firmed up as a recommendation from the packaging team, is how does one actually what's the workflow that we recommend for producing and storing the package CRs, right? So currently we just say produce a package CR and then, include it in your repo bundle, where it's going to get used by, some other tooling, right? We don't really recommend right now to at least try to template the package CRs, right? Because, once you introduce templating, that means that you're kind of maintaining a live set of, of configuration, versus we see package CR is more like a record in time, right? Like once you create it, it's there. You shouldn't probably be, messing around with it or regenerating it or something like that, right? And so, I guess, how does that relate to what's kind of the example that the example workflow that you're providing, is that probably then this package YAML really acts as that starter, right? And then the output of that YTT command would be like, okay, here's the package CR that got generated. Save it, right? Save it into the Git repo directly, right? So don't keep on regenerating the thing. So that's definitely a viable way to kind of glue those things together, right? Obviously, everybody has access to Bash, so they can try to glue it directly in Bash without YTT, but that's probably not ideal, since you would then have to figure out how to indent certain things and whatnot. So yeah, so this is pretty good. We'll probably, this is more what to do for the packaging team, is we'll probably need to circle back and actually provide some general recommendation. We've been working with a few VMware teams that are consuming this packaging format, and so this recommendation would probably be very helpful to them.
Yeah, that's a great call out. Like, package COs right now aren't normally generated using YTT templates, and so that would be a bit of a different workflow than is current.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because we definitely want to recommend that, this doesn't get regenerated if a YTT data value schema file gets updated, right? Because I think a package CR is like tied to a version, right? So it doesn't necessarily get updated. Yeah.
This kind of gets back into a question of what is that system that people use to keep track of this package CRs, right? They might have a CI pipeline that says, okay, this version of a package is good. We'll publish that up to the registry, and then we will, have this package CR dropped into some, folder in a Git repository or something like that. And so I think that actually, now that I think about it, the other pieces in the package CR, like a version, for example, need to be inserted in, right? Or for example, the reference, the digest reference, right, should be placed into the package CR at the time of the creation of the package CR. So there's other pieces of information that need to go in. So this would be, I think this would be in line with the OpenAPI schema as well.
Yeah, that makes
sense.
sense.
Maybe then this boils down to, should we be providing like a little common template that, folks kind of base off their, I don't know, CI pipeline on, or something like that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That definitely seems like something that maybe the packaging team wants to kind of standardize. Like, it seems like this templating or this proposal for how to insert the OpenAPI schema is just one aspect of that, and there's probably something larger that could be done for like the entire package CR document, if this aligns with that. So cool.
Yeah.
I have a.
By the way, I don't know if this is an accident here, but it seems like the indentation disappeared on that package CR for some of the things. I don't know if it's just the browser bug or whatever.
It did.
I've been bitten by GitHub and Firefox not working this week very well with indentation, so I don't know.
I have a question on that key though. OpenAPI v3. Does that mean there's a v2, a v1, potentially a v4, like in the future? And I'm wondering how that ties to how we generate the specific version for OpenAPI. And I apologize if it's already been discussed in this issue or PR.
Yeah, I think only OpenAPI v3 exists in a package CR. So that's to say, I think OpenAPI v3 is the only supported format in a package CR.
Yeah, and for other folks.
I really like this question.
Okay, go for it, Dimitri.
I really like this question because it poses a, should we be actually using v3 as a suffix in the generation side of things, right? Because let's say when OpenAPI v4 comes out, right? What is -o OpenAPI really mean, right? And I'm guessing that's where you were going at with this question.
With the generation part of it, yeah.
Maybe as a side note, the reason why we picked OpenAPI v3 is this something that Kubernetes uses in the CRDs as a key as well. So we're trying to be aligned with that. But yeah, I think when we will finalize the -o, let's say, naming, right, we should actually be more strict about what is the thing that we're generating here.
I'm mostly guessing that this is something that you get from the metadata. If you were to do like the OpenAPI full, not just the schemas, like it would tell you which OpenAPI version you have. So I don't know, that could just be more things to consider if we made things a bit more open, but you also required, I guess, a version to be provided as well.
From a packaging perspective, one reason why we really want everybody to be using the same thing is, right, is we don't want the clients to be struggling with trying to figure out what are the, you know, tons of possible variations, right? And this is a similar kind of a, like, you know, originally, you know, there were questions around like, well, should we be, you know, exposing the YTT schema here, but maybe for packages that use, you know, Helm templating underneath, should we be somehow exposing whatever, you know, some other format there, right? And so the thinking here is that the packaging API should formalize or should normalize being kind of asked, so that the clients are not necessarily, you know, trying to support all possible schemas. But over time, I guess, you know, I think that's the intention here behind this key naming in Kubernetes as well. Over time, there will probably be other versions that are supported, and they actually might have to be filled in, you know, for both versions, right, to be backwards compatible potentially.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and I know that like the OpenAPI version between V2 and V3 is really different. Like a lot has changed. So it seems like an important distinction to say what format it is. Normally when you have an entire OpenAPI document, it includes the OpenAPI version specifically. However, the kapp-controller and the Kubernetes CRD only includes the component.schema section of that document. And so it omits the OpenAPI version, which is maybe why they chose to inline it, because they don't include the entire document there. But I think that's,
yeah, they end up generating this as like a full document is being generated at a particular API endpoint, so that you know, they're in control of you know, the actual surrounding other information. So that's why it's kind of it's the chunk. And you can kind of argue from our perspective, even though we're not actively doing that, we would potentially want to do something like that as well.
I think that also brings up an interesting point of like, this may work well for kapp-controller who's consuming this OpenAPI schema. You know, how will other people be using this OpenAPI schema that gets generated? Like, you know, do they need to know the version that was used in order to create the OpenAPI schema? Because it's not, like in the current proposal, it's not included the version information. So for example, the OpenAPI schema that will get generated looks like this. It's just the schemas section. So it doesn't include the version, which would look like this if it did include the version. So yeah, if somebody was just outputting this to a file to use as like documentation for their YTT configuration, it would not include the OpenAPI version or anything other information like that, you know, people may want to see. by default, there is a command proposed to include all of the headers that include subversion using this.
I think maybe I was making some assumptions from this conversation, but I was taking away that we would update the flag from OpenAPI to be OpenAPI v3, and then have an OpenAPI v3 -full as well. But maybe I misinterpreted some things earlier.
That's what I was going with it. That was my thought. You know, when v4 comes out and they want to use a v4 generate a v4 schema, it'll be OpenAPI v4 -full.
Yeah, I hadn't really considered that, but I think that's something that we should make note of. Something like this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. That's actually something that I wanted to talk about next, unless there are any other questions on the kapp-controller workflow. Cool. So we haven't really come to an agreement on what the flag name will be. I think there are a lot of good options out there. The one that's currently being proposed is, like, for example, in this scratch pad that I have here, the ones that are being proposed here. Data value schema inspect, which takes a -o OpenAPI flag. This command kind of plays off of the command that we have right now, data values inspect. The way that command works is all of the data values and schema, data value schema files that you input into YTT get output after they have all been merged together. And the command that's being proposed is similar to that, but it only, well, it would also include the annotations that are present in a data value schema document. Like, for example, the annotations that exist right now are like #@schema type any and schema/nullable. That's those sorts of things that document exactly like what the schema document allows.
What about in your YTT project, if it contains a library and that library contains a schema, does that get output as well in this OpenAPI document, or is that just omitted? Or is it multiple docs get spat out?
Yeah, that's something that I considered a little bit. I think it makes sense to omit them, at least for the first iteration of this. But, you know, because you can target a schema at a library, you can use a library ref annotation in your schema to apply a schema to a library. I think it's something that should be supported with this command eventually.
Yeah, I forget what we do for data values, but I'm pretty certain we don't go on and kind of recursively show that information. Mostly because, you know, when you're ultimately working with a root library, right? And so you're trying to figure out how do you configure it. Now, there's obviously some use cases where you may want to configure a library instance that's been instantiated by the root library, but at least today we don't expose it. If we would expose that information, I would imagine that we need to have a more general way to select which library you're looking at, right? It wouldn't be like specific to data value schema, it would be specific to everything, right? Like maybe the entire output, maybe the data value, well, not maybe, but for data values, for schemas, for the output, for overlays, all that stuff. It's almost like you can think of it as like evaluating only a portion of what's given to you.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to follow the same pattern that we do for data values inspect right now. And so, yeah, since that doesn't include library files, I think it makes sense to do the same for data value schema inspect.
It also doesn't feel like it's too onerous on users. If you want to see the schema for a library, you can target your YTT invocation to that library and include this flag, and you'll get the schema for that library, because at that point, that invocation will see that library, and its data value schema will be the subject, the root. And if you're using a library ref to provide data values to a dependency of your root library already, then it's already a separate file. You already have this kind of experience of you're kind of reaching on a side channel. You have that feel of you're reaching on a side channel to provide that configuration. So this doesn't seem to introduce any awkwardness either into that flow for now.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. I listed some other flags that were considered and proposed by others. And if anybody feels strongly about any of these ones that were proposed, like feel free to bring it up now. There were some that used the word generate and create, which I think is a great idea, but does not follow the current pattern that we have for other flags. Following the same pattern is one of the main motivations for why I chose the data value schema inspect command, because it mirrors the ones that already exist. But I am happy to consider ones that use the word create or generate more if others feel strongly.
I was thinking about this a bit, because inspect feels like, it's retrieving information that currently exists, whereas we do kind of create a bit of new information from existing information. So like I thought about it a little bit, but ultimately I'm fine with it, but just wanted to share that thoughts. I don't know if it resonates with other folks, or even like the current usage of the existing commands and flags.
One thing that on the side we're discussing with John is kind of at a high level, what are we, like, is there some, how you call it, more holistic way to look at this stuff, right? And if you're gonna kind of imagine YTT as a pipeline, right, where throughout that pipeline, there's the schema evaluation, then there is the data value evaluation, then there is finally the templating, and then there's finally the overlaying, and then, well, that's the end, right? We are inspecting a schema at a particular point, right, at the beginning of that pipeline, because it's the first thing, the data value schema specifically, not just general schema. And I think, I don't know, we were toying around with kind of different ways to really think about it. I think, at least in my mind, so far what I have is we're just presenting YTT schema in a different format. Now, what does that mean to use -o OpenAPI, let's say, in a different context? That kind of gets into a very hypothetical world. Like, what is the input to that, right? It's like, typically it's YTT schema, but what is the input to the other thing. If you're, I don't know, maybe you're saying YTT data values inspect -o OpenAPI. What does that mean? But anyway, so that's kind of why I'm leaning towards inspect, is because we are just inspecting part of the pipeline. Maybe there's even a greater argument to have is that should we have a general -- inspect flag that takes in an argument like data values schema, I don't know, post templating, that kind of thing, right? But I think if we're going to generalize some of that stuff, then we should probably have a more complete view of what we actually would want to show. Like, for example, should we be allowing people to see the output after each overlay, for example, right? That kind of thing, which would be really handy if you're actually seeing it, like after this overlay, this change happened, but then click on the next button, here's the next change happen on the next overlay. So it will be really useful for debugging, but also kind of consolidates this bunch of functionality into a more general feature.
I like the idea of having a generic inspect flag. But I also like the fact that they're specific to what you want to inspect, since it allows you to just invoke YTT with an entire directory. And you can just get only a specific part of the files that you gave to YTT in that inspect. But I see both.
I do have one other quick question that might have been addressed in the proposal. I haven't looked at it in a couple days, but the flag, I guess the -o OpenAPI and OpenAPI full. I'm curious what the thinking of here for OpenAPI to be just the schema versus kind of like the full, and then we would have something like OpenAPI schema for just the schema. And my thinking of that is like OpenAPI as like the default option would return what you would expect from an OpenAPI. I don't know what the output is, format or document. Whereas the schema itself feels like that's something that's more specialized, but curious to get thoughts there.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I like the idea of optimizing for the users that we know that we have right now, which is kapp-controller. And kapp-controller really only needs the schema section of the document. So that's one of the reasons why I decided to choose it as kind of the default OpenAPI format. It's because we know that people, at least one user wants that right now. And I don't have a great idea of if, other users will even really need the entire OpenAPI document. And so making that the default format, I don't want to add additional information to the output that may not even be needed. So that's kind of my reasoning behind it, but yeah, curious what others think.
I could offer, I don't think of kapp-controller as a person. So specifically, I think kapp-controller gets to kind of hard code its own arguments that it needs somewhere, and then never cares again if they were wordy or long, right? Versus I think a human who stumbles along a few months from now is maybe the more interesting case to optimize like their ergonomics or their experience. Even though I appreciate that, we all get to be good friends on the Carvel team and look out for each other's use case. It actually seems like one of the easier ones. Like you could have the longest, ugliest flag, and we'd only see it like every 6 months when we edited that file.
I think what Kerry meant is the users of packaging APIs, because kapp-controller itself doesn't actually execute this command.
Okay, sorry, I misunderstood.
I still hear your point of like, you know, there can be extra information, and if kapp-controller doesn't need to worry about that, then it's sort of inconsequential, if I understand you correctly. That providing extra information is not necessarily detrimental to the kapp-controller use case.
Yeah, but I think I thought kapp-controller was directly invoking it. So if it's humans in all cases, that's a little bit that I think that negates what I was trying to say.
Is there OpenAPI terminology for? I mean, there's obviously a term, you know, the key that they use schema as a, you know, as a key for that section, right? I don't know if there's a OpenAPI terminology for the entire document. Maybe it's OpenAPI document. I don't know.
That is what they call it. Yeah.
So that might be an alternative, right? Having a OpenAPI doc and OpenAPI schema. And arguably, maybe kapp-controller should have actually called it OpenAPI v3 schema instead of, you know, well, not doing that.
Yeah, I see your point.
Yeah, I feel like this question was a bit about deciding which bias to choose. I like the way that you were describing how you were thinking about the decision, Carrie. If we look at it from a Carvel user, then they already know they're generating schema, and it can feel a little bit redundant in one's mind if I'm saying data value schema inspect dash OpenAPI dash schema. But if I instead place my bias from the concept of OpenAPI, from the world of OpenAPI, and I'm naming the object that's getting generated, is exactly what Dimitri was pointing out, that like the output would be, in fact, probably OpenAPI without a qualifier. I might assume, coming from the OpenAPI perspective, would be a OpenAPI document, and that the dash, I think Aaron, you were saying this, and that the dash schema is the special selection within that document for the schema component.
Yeah, I think that also makes sense. I think we should dig more into that, of, you know, what users expect from this command or from this flag. You know, is it just kapp-controller? Is it, you know, do users have other needs? We're out of time today to talk more about this, but this was extremely helpful, and thank you all for sharing your thoughts on this and asking questions. Hoping to continue this conversation in the PR. So please, you know, feel free to add comments here, or, you know, kind of a follow-up call for this.
Thanks, Carrie, for bringing that up for discussion, and thanks everyone for joining in. If you're watching this from home and you would like to provide your own thoughts on this, please feel free to drop those comments in that doc that Carrie shared, or find us on Slack or Twitter. We would love to hear from you. And also just a reminder, like I mentioned earlier in this meeting, we would love to hear about how you're using Carvel. So please go to that pinned issue and share your details about how you're using any of the Carvel tools in the tool suite. And with that, have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.